Awesome. Thank you so much. So, first of all, before I get into me, let me start with everyone here. Thank you all for being here. And for those of you who are going to be watching this back at a later date, couldn't be with us here right now, thank you as well for watching this back. It's really critical and it's really important. This is going to sound like a platitude. I promise it's not one. When I say that it's important to get to know this stuff inside and out, not from a how do you build a neural net? How do you develop an algorithm for machine learning? That stuff is far, far less relevant than what all of you are engaging in right now and what I've engaged in scholarship for probably the last 5 or 6 years now, kind of the crux between the humanities, which is my PhD is in literature combined with artificial intelligence. I teach digital humanities at the University of Pittsburgh, Johnstown, and have for about 6 years now. And the reason I say that it is the crux is not necessarily how to build these transformative models, not necessarily how to establish them, but to use them for a purpose and with ethical and moral and integral guidelines in mind, right? That's absolutely critical for us to remember because with any new technology, there should always be a series of rules that we need to follow. And those rules, especially when you're dealing with an emerging technology, are never perfectly clear, right? This is the kind of thing that I think is extremely important to discuss. So that's why I want to give everybody, here with me now and watching this back later, I want to give you quite a bit of credit for being here because you're taking that step. Even those of you who said things like, I need help or this is big, right? Especially credit to you because you're coming out on a limb and experiencing this new revolutionary transformative technology alongside us. So props to everyone there. So, a little bit about myself. Like I said, I teach digital humanities at the University of Pittsburgh, Johnstown. I also consult with companies, some major Fortune 500s and some small kind of local mom and pop shops as well. And all of them are grappling with the same concept. What is AI? How do I deploy it? How do I deploy it ethically? And how can I train my people in how to use it, right? Everyone now is it's a democratization of technology, right? We're all on the same page. We're all starting from square zero when it comes to application of generative artificial intelligence specifically. Incidentally, I'm going to be using AI to refer to generative AI throughout this presentation. Don't think that I'm talking about things like deep learning or machine learning. I'm only talking about generative AI. So with that caveat out of the way, all of these companies are working on the same foundational ground level. We're all learning this stuff together and we're all learning how to apply it together. And every single time a new update comes around or a new neural net is released, whether that be from Anthropic or obviously OpenAI is kind of the industry leader right now, what you're going to see is that learning process reset where everybody starts to see, oh, wait a minute, I need to develop these new materials. And that thing I used to do before doesn't work anymore. How do I keep up with it? That's precisely what I'm hoping to give everybody today is a series of, I hesitate to call them evergreen because of course nothing is going to last forever, but as long lived in the spirit of the humanities that I study, as long lived as possible so that everyone is going to come away from this with a series of rules and a series of expectations for both themselves and the people for which they are developing their materials for their clients so that they can deploy this kind of software in a really safe, equitable, valuable, and ultimately ethical manner. So that's a long-winded introduction. So I think it's time for me to get to the presentation itself. And let us begin at the beginning. So, this, of course, is Exploring New Frontiers of Human Tech Interaction and Learning, a Go One webinar. Now, I also want to throw this out there. I promise this will be the last editor's note. If you want, please feel free at any time to drop a question in chat. I will be pausing a number of times throughout this presentation to take questions and field them as best I can. And I will try to deal with a number of them at the end of the presentation. So if you have something that you need clarified, if you want to discuss more, or frankly, if you just find something interesting and want to delve into it more deeply, please drop that question, note, comment in chat, and I will do my best to get to you as we power through this. So what's on the agenda today? Cybersecurity and data privacy, that's bullet point number one. That sits first and foremost because it is the one that all the other ones necessarily have to travel through. You can't do anything ethically until you are sure it is secure, and I'll go into detail on that in our first chapter. Secondly, copyright, ownership, and fair use. Here's where things get legal. And by legal, I mean confusing. And I know that sounds kind of vague. Trust me, when I get there, you're going to start to see how the application of ethics within law tends to become more, it's the grayest of legal gray areas that I think we've ever encountered. Thirdly, we'll examine how to maintain empathy within the individual and avoiding implicit trust of the technology, how to be a cynical technology user, which is always critical and useful to avoid things like mis and disinformation, as well as something that I'm sure all of you are familiar with. LLMs are prone to hallucinations. And finally, we'll discuss what this technology looks like when it is leveraged to its natural terminus for the L&D space, which is personalized learning. Couple definitions I'm going to be running through today. Now, please know that a number of these are industry standard and a number of them are not. They're just kind of my kind of nomenclature that I tend to refer to things. So these are the ones that you're probably going to want to know for this webinar. There are obviously significantly more. Things like ML stands for machine learning. I don't have it on here, but I'm going to tend away from the machine learning, data science, data analytics portion. And like I said before, focus in on the applications and ethics. So briefly, not going to read through every single one of these, but the key one, the one on the very bottom, Gen AI or generative artificial intelligence, like I mentioned before, that is where the focus of this presentation is going to lie. Obviously, I have the ubiquitous example, ChatGPT, but that is far from the only one. I'm sure a number of you have already experimented with other multimedia tools, things like Runway for animation purposes, things like Udio for audio purposes, Midjourney and Dolly for image purposes, and so on. Gen AI is the umbrella that houses all of those technologies, which ultimately may or may not, in some form or another, find their way into the L&D materials that you're creating, depending on client need. So, Chapter 1, Cybersecurity and Data Privacy, how to keep confidential information where it belongs. This, like I said, is the most important bullet point that I can stress to everyone today. And I'm going to be doing this a number of times. I actually have for you 3 what I would call sound bites. So I'll point them out as we get to them, but they're my big key takeaways from this presentation. So if you walk away from this presentation saying, what did he say again? Right? What did I learn from this? I want you to remember those 3 really key important things. And it begins here at cybersecurity and data privacy. And this is soundbite number 1. Don't trust AI, any AI, Gen AI, with sensitive data. Now, there are some caveats to this. There are some data security measures you can absolutely take. And in fact, most of the companies that set up their own special isolated networks that use an API, I won't get into the details on that, use an API to call to a neural net, those are data secure. There are quite a few companies out there that are doing precisely that. However, if you happen to be producing materials for a client who has a number of people in the office who said, what's ChatGPT? Maybe I can use it to write my invoices. Don't do that. Don't trust AI with sensitive data. Why? Well, quite simply, anything you release to the AI, now that is, of course, the prompt that you type in, as well as the completion that the system generates, will be scraped and will be stored by the AI company. The one I'm specifically referring to here, of course, is OpenAI. It is a security risk. There is an option to turn that off, but I don't recommend it because you lose a lot of the functionality within the system, as well as the fact that you can never be 100% sure that your data isn't still being scraped. Who has access to it? Who has ownership of that data? Well, OpenAI does. It goes on a server somewhere and is then used to fill out a JSON file, JavaScript object notation file. That's what's used to train future models. So anything you prompt and put into the system, as well as anything the system generates as a completion, those will all be scraped and saved. And you can probably imagine that information, things like for HR purposes, employee salaries, for example, right? That would be something that could get you in a lot of trouble if it is shared. Who has access to that data once it is scraped by OpenAI? Short answer, we don't know. OpenAI has access to it. They know who they deliver it to, and that's it. The rest of it is a closely guarded industry secret. So to shore up your cybersecurity and to make your cybersecurity expert give you a big old hug, don't trust artificial intelligence, Gen AI, in any capacity with sensitive data. There are Gen AI systems, and the one I'm referring to here is Claude, built by Anthropic, which claim not to harvest this information. I have heard from both sides. There are a number of people who say, no, it never does. It's excellent. Don't worry about it. And I've heard my side, the cynical side, which tends to say, I don't trust OpenAI. Why would I trust Anthropic as well? The bullet point takeaway here, again, don't trust AI with sensitive data. That is the critical key point. In addition to being a violation of privacy and data security, it may also be a felony. Now, I say may also because, to my knowledge, none of this has yet been litigated. But let me give you an example of some of these just so you can kind of see how the thread of which this sort of violation might run. In my world, in academia, we are governed by the FERPA, the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. This confirms that only myself, the instructor of record, and the student, and anyone the student authorizes in writing to know their grades, can know their grades. If I, for example, were to use a system like ChatGPT to grade assignments for me, I have suddenly and instantly violated FERPA because now all of that grade information, along with the student's identifying characteristics, is now property of OpenAI. Medical facilities, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, known as HIPAA, also applies in this circumstance. A quick aside here, I should mention, I am based in the United States, so I'll be discussing U.S. legal terminology. Please, please, please investigate the rights, acts, and laws within your home country, your home state. Sometimes they vary from state to state in some cases. Know that this is not a universal prescription. Know that it may change and likely will change as new technology is developed and as that technology, of course, goes through its own changes and, of course, gets litigated through Congress. Obviously, anyone with a government position or anyone who deals with a client who deals with top secret data, say government contracts, for example, or compartmentalized information, absolutely should go without saying not to use Gen AI for that, as well as the one I already mentioned, HR, like personal records, protected information, or salary. It may potentially be construed as a felony, like I mentioned. Again, I say potentially because, to my knowledge, none of these cases have yet been litigated. But just know that use of Gen AI requires this information to be released in the form of the prompt. The AI quite literally cannot do the job you have assigned it to do unless it has access to the information, which constitutes a potential error. So I think I've scared you guys enough. Just know, don't use Gen AI unless you were in a secure online environment. Speaking of which, you can absolutely build one. And if you are dealing with a client who doesn't have one, I would strongly recommend that you recommend to them to do exactly that. This, of course, requires access to a neural net in a different user interface and user experience model, typically requires an API, and typically that is an enterprise license. That is, if you have a large company. Instances of this UX UI can be made secure to the individual's company and therefore data secure. Individuals who work for that company will be the only ones with access if properly set up by cybersecurity, and your information will be saved and secure there. In that case, and in that instance, there is no worry about anything that I just told you, but only in that case and in that instance. There's a number of options on the market right now: RunPod, Azure, Databricks, plus a number of others that all offer this type of service. Just know that it is available, and this is likely going to be a growing market as well, because as we know, cybersecurity is all the more important as emerging technology continues to emerge. And finally, just to revisit that final bullet point, if you don't have a secure environment, employees must learn not to trust AI with sensitive information. And I've lectured you enough about privacy, so let me lecture you now about legality. Let's talk about copyright ownership and fair use. And the big ethical question that kind of floats around here is one that is utterly unsolved, and it is the question of who owns generative artificial intelligence content, if anyone. First things first, let's draw a specific distinction here between ethical, moral, legal, and integral. So what I have here is kind of a rough framework of what each of these terms means. And any number of you who have studied ethics likely know that ethics is typically relative. Depending upon which ethical system you employ, say, for example, you're a utilitarian or you employ Kant's categorical imperative, right? Each of these is going to have a various or separate application depending on which ethical system you, or in this case, your client, operates under. So the question you have to ask yourself when developing materials, is this application ethical? Does it breach my institutions, my superiors, or even my discipline's established code of ethics? Secondly, and this is a distinct question, you have to judge these separately, is this moral? Am I personally okay with the application of AI which is being developed and delivered? Have I considered both product and or process within my moral framework? And I, of course, can't tell you what your moral framework is. That's for everyone to decide on their own. But it is important to keep that in mind and know how Gen AI operates such that you're not doing something that you would typically deem immoral if you knew it was operating in that manner. Third, legal. This is the giant gray blob that we don't know yet. Right now, does my application open me or my institution or my client to liability? Is it copyrightable and is it actionable? The answer to all of those questions right now is we have absolutely no idea. Now, I know that sounds like a cop out, but I'm going to get into the reasons here in the next few slides. There is an extraordinarily limited amount of litigation regarding this. As you might expect, the technology is incredibly new, and the speed at which AI moves puts the speed of bureaucracy to absolute shame. Just know that it is going to change based on where you are in the world. It is going to change based on your industry, your use case, and the AI model itself. And also know that most of these decisions have not yet been made. Finally, integral. Does the application that you're developing, whatever it is, have integrity? So can you, for example, consider research derived from that application or knowledge developed with it? Is that a breach of academic, moral, or ethical integrity? That's a question that we can't answer unless we examine each use on a case-by-case basis. Again, note that each of these, ethical, moral, legal, and integral, they're not mutually exclusive, but they should be considered exclusive of one another. Something can very readily be considered ethical, but be immoral. So you're going to want to make sure that whatever it is you're developing, say, for example, a human resources app that grades people's performance and assigns them a new salary. Is that something we can do? Absolutely. Is it ethical? Depends on your system of ethics. Is it moral? I hesitate on that one, right? Is it legal? We don't know yet. And is it integral? Well, maybe. Depends what industry you're in. So it's important to separate each of these. And personally, for my use cases, I don't develop any AI application unless it checks all four of these boxes, right? It has to be ethical, it has to be moral, it has to be legal, and it has to be integral. And the reason that we want to apply all four is taken together, these form something that a term you may have heard, which is called responsible AI, or perhaps AI for good is another way of saying that. Responsible AI just means all of these terms are being applied, analyzed, and accounted for within whatever application we're looking for. So I mentioned before that things get rather sticky in a hurry, and we don't really understand precisely how we're applying these rule sets. And to prove that point, I would like to show you the current Amazon policies on generative AI content. Why Amazon policies? Well, because there is no law that dictates this stuff as of yet, like I mentioned. So this is about the closest thing to an authoritative figure we have. And you'll notice there is a distinct difference. AI generated versus AI assisted. AI generated content is created by an AI based tool. Okay, seems simple enough. Versus AI assisted, where you create the content yourself and use an AI based tool to edit, refine, error check, or improve that content, whether text or image. All right, that kind of makes sense in the big picture. But then we start to examine the nuanced use cases. So let's say, for example, you have an individual in the L&D environment, and what they want to do is they want to create copy for a website. They go to ChatGPT or Claude and they say, make me the copy for the website, and it makes that copy. And then they, as a professional, go back in and they edit the copy and they revise it and they get it set and they post it online. According to these policies, which again are the only guidance we have at the moment, that's considered AI generated and is not okay. However, if we take that exact same situation, we have an individual handwrite notes, just bullet points that they want to address, not even complete sentences, and then run that through an AI system and say, turn this into a blog post. That's now AI assisted. And that is something that, according to these policies, is not only okay, but doesn't even need to be disclosed that you used AI in the assistance of generating this text. Responsible AI posits that if you use AI, you disclose the fact you used AI. That's the only way you're going to hit all four of those bullet points. It's really important that we do so, essentially to avoid this incredibly murky area where we don't know the difference between generated and assisted, and we have absolutely no guidance which actually delineates between the two. Allow me to show you, as we kind of work our way toward the legal realm, probably the most controversial artificial intelligence picture of all time. This is a recent entrance to paradise created by Stephen Thaler. Maybe. We don't know if Stephen is the artist or not. I'll talk about that in just a moment. Using the software Creativity Machine. This work is extraordinarily controversial, not for its content, but for what it means to AI law. And we're talking specifically here about copyrightability. This gave rise to Thaler v. Perlmutter, case first brought in 2019. It was ruled, appealed, and ultimately the original decision was affirmed in 2022. It was the first decision of its kind and essentially affirmed that human authorship is a required component of copyright. So what happened here? What's the situation? And why is this picture so controversial? It's just, a road through what looks like an enchanting garden. Well, essentially, Thaler developed this picture using the Creativity Machine AI software. He then filed for a copyright on this art because he was intending to sell it. The U.S. Copyright Office rejected the claim and said, "You can't copyright that, you didn't make it." To which Thaler countersued and said, "You are violating my First Amendment rights to establish art, my artistic merit." That case went to court, and ultimately, as you might believe, it was ruled in favor of the U.S. Copyright Office. The art was uncopyrightable because, according to the appellate board, the nexus between the human mind and creative expression is a vital element of copyright. What does that mean? Apparently, only the court knows, as we'll get into in just a moment. Thaler, of course, appealed the decision, and ultimately, the original decision was upheld. Takeaway here is that AI-generated work is uncopyrightable. Okay. Now, note the language here. AI-generated work, but AI-assisted work is not only apparently copyrightable, but also something we don't even need to disclose. Furthermore, the appellate board separated the notions of animal or divine creation from that of machine or algorithmic. That's the category that it included artificial intelligence, suggesting to them there is no current link between the two. The Congressional Research Service went even further and said, quote, "Assuming that a copyrightable work requires a human author, works created by humans using generative AI could still be entitled to copyright protection, depending on the nature of human involvement in the creative process." Look at that. So they could still get a copyright, just not this one, is what they're saying, depending on the nature of human involvement in the creative process. We'll get to this in a later slide, but the question they're actually asking here is how much AI is too much AI? In March 2023, the Copyright Office released guidance stating that when AI determines the expressive elements of its output, in other words, when it decides what the picture looks like, then ultimately it's responsible for the authorship. Now, here's where things get extraordinarily weird, right? It's not a product of human authorship, which means it can't, of course, be copywritten. So that means this picture is unauthored. It's just a picture that just happens to be floating around in the ether. Stephen Thaler can't take credit for it because he can't copyright it. He's not the artist or the author. But at the same time, according to this rule, he could take credit for it if he used AI to modify it. So what does all this mean? Why am I bringing up all this complex issue of copyrightability in the L&D space? Well, the reason is this. Know that if you are using Gen AI in the creation of your lesson materials, there may well be aspects of those materials which are uncopyrightable. You may perhaps be able to copyright something like the syllabus or the direction or the learning outcomes or the modules, right? Those particular aspects could be and should be copyrightable. I'm going to say should be there because I'm not a lawyer. However, according to the research that we have here, any visual materials are at the moment, if generated by artificial intelligence, not copyrightable. That's something that employees need to know, because if they are using something like Midjourney or Dolly to generate art, let's say it's stock art for a website, for example, that is uncopyrightable and can immediately and without penalty be taken by anyone who happens to browse to that website. Something to keep in mind. At the moment, no case has yet appeared that documents AI writing or UX UI, likenesses, presentations, and there are, of course, Gen AI that covers all of those things, though at the moment it's unclear if they would be treated differently. Now, if you hadn't had enough legal stuff, let's get into the next, possibly even more complicated one, and this is the fair use doctrine. This stems from two cases, which are functionally the same, but they are not class action, which is why I separated them here. That is New York Times versus Microsoft et al. And Silverman et al. Versus OpenAI. Silverman here being Sarah Silverman, the celebrity. Now, it's important to know here, if you don't know the background, that Microsoft is a billion-dollar investor in OpenAI. So effectively, these two cases are from two different plaintiffs towards the same conglomerate of defendants, although they were filed in two separate courts. Both of them allege direct copyright infringement. Now, you might be asking yourself, how can Gen AI be copyright infringing? I thought everything that it produced was algorithmic and therefore original, a remix, if you will, of material that came before it. Well, this is essentially what is being alleged by plaintiffs in these two cases. Essentially, the argument goes like this. Because the algorithms, in this case OpenAI's, was trained on copyrighted materials from the New York Times or Silverman or other celebrities, they therefore own the copyright on the materials on which the machine was trained, and therefore they should be due either a direct copyright infringement judgment on any output that ChatGPT and the like produce, or should be paid a stipend or a royalty every single time the software is invoked. These cases bear the same structure from different plaintiffs, like I said, and each emphasize that data scraping used by OpenAI to train these systems is a breach of copyright. What's the outcome of these? We don't know. They are still being litigated. They've basically, as you know, the court system works fairly slowly. They're still working their way through. I believe the most recent one was filed, the New York Times lawsuit was filed in December of last year, if I'm not mistaken. Don't quote me on that one. But it is fairly recent, less than 6 months old. So essentially, we are still waiting on the outcome. Now, here's the important takeaway here for the L&D space. If you are generating content, is that content going to ultimately be copywritten and claimed by someone else? Apparently, it's possible. The argument that OpenAI is making here is that it is fair use, right? They aren't using the entirety of Silverman or New York Times works, for example. They don't reproduce them in their entirety. They're using bits and pieces of them. In fact, they're using the patterns found within them that the neural net extrapolates and then therefore embodies. That's the thing that is being copied. So essentially, New York Times and Silverman seem to be asking to the court to grant that they have ownership over individual words, because that's effectively what's happening. It's, as you know, large language models tend to remix language. That's effectively how they operate. So you might be saying, well, you can't copyright an individual word, except you absolutely can copyright an individual word. Think about things like think different and just do it, and we love to see you smile, right? These phrases, these patterns, these are copyrighted materials. And if these cases are successful, anytime phrases like that appear in some other plaintiff's work also appears in Gen AI content, that could potentially be content that would either owe a stipend or must be taken down and subject to, of course, a cease and desist letter. This is all to say, once again, that we don't know what the outcome here is going to be. However, I do not in any way want to dissuade you from asking your clients to use Gen AI when they request it, training them how to do it. Why? Because probably the biggest precedent here is this giant block of text you see in the Silverman case. In addition to direct copyright infringement, this group of celebrities, of plaintiffs, they also alleged vicarious infringement, a DMCA, Digital Millennium Copyright Act violation, unfair competition, negligence, the whole, everything was thrown at this case. The only litigation that has come out of either of these thus far is that everything except the direct copyright infringement was dismissed by the court. So can we take this as a sign that these cases are going to be ultimately terminated? I don't know. That's not something that I can speculate on. Again, not a lawyer. But it seems to be a good sign for the AI companies that they were able to get the bulk of this thrown out. The fair use argument at the moment seems to be holding. Will it continue to hold? Well, that's up for debate. Speaking of debate, let's talk about the battle over authorship. We already established earlier that there is no such thing as an AI an author to an uncopyrightable work. So then the question naturally becomes, is the AI the author? Well, the court seems to say no, but style guides seem to say yes. What do I mean by style guides? Anyone who's in academia is subject to these. Anyone who's in L&D who's developing materials to companies that are also within style guide purviews. Think, for example, of the medical community has to abide by the AMA style guide, the Chicago, MLA, APA, and so on. Style guides seem to say yes. In fact, there is a citation format within every style guide, the exception being AMA, as a matter of fact, that demonstrates how you cite something from an AI author, which means that according to the style guides, AI authorship is A-OK, but not according to the courts. So the question then becomes, is it necessary to divulge AI involvement? Well, if you want to be ethical, yes. If you want responsible AI, yes. Now, not every client is unfortunately going to want responsible AI. They're going to want powerful, effective, useful AI. And I personally believe, personal opinion alert, here it comes. I personally believe that it is our responsibility to make sure that AI is being deployed in a responsible way. If it is ethically necessary, how do we police such a system, considering the inability of current methodologies to do the policing? You should know that no system on the market now, and I have audited all of them, copy leaks, quill writing detector, GPT-0, a whole array of them. No system is capably able to reliably detect AI writing. They all make some grandiose claims, and through a pretty rigorous set of auditing, I have determined in my own research that none of them are really any better than a coin flip. The best one was GPT-0, which achieved about a 55% accuracy rate as to whether or not text was AI authored. So this is important to know, that we don't have a way to police this system if we ultimately decide that we cannot consider the AI an author. This is not even delving into the question about claims against IP. For example, I can use Gen AI to produce a copyrighted character, Batman, right? I can use it to produce a likeness of a famous individual, pick a celebrity. Why does that matter? Well, that's, of course, a likeness claim and is different than the claim over authorship. No one wrote it, so no one owns it. Seems to be a strange direction this precedent is headed. What if that becomes stare decisis? I have absolutely no idea. If we do allow AI authorship, then who is the author of the text? According to the Thaler lawsuit, it should be the prompt engineer. According to the New York Times and Silverman lawsuits, it should be the authors of the text from which the AI collected the information. And according to futurists like Kurzweil and Elon Musk, it should be the AI itself. Now, I don't want to go so far as to give my personal take on this because, frankly, it's irrelevant to what your takeaway is. But as an L&D developer, these are the questions that very, very often no one knows what to ask. They don't know how to ask it. They don't recognize the legal intricacies and the ethical guidelines that are at the interplay of this kind of application. So it's our job to educate. It's our job to inform and to recommend a course of action, to our client with our client's best interests in mind, that we are able to direct them in a manner such that they can act with responsible AI while also keeping all of these rule sets in mind. Next up is our questions about governance, because a number of current attempts, and again, I'm speaking only of the United States here, at the federal level to institute regulations regarding AI have been undertaken. Most of them are outgrowths of the DMCA. That's the same rule that was referenced in the Silverman lawsuit, and some are completely new ventures, including rule by fiat. No current attempt in the United States has been successful. However, the European Union has been successful in instituting a governance policy. This would be the EU AI Act, thus winning the award for most vowels in a single law. In May of 2024, this was signed into law and is enormous. I believe it clocks in at somewhere between 1,100 and 1,200 pages, something like that. It's absolutely enormous. It deals less with ethics and more with an attempt to establish oversight on the part of AI developers, less so on AI applicants like ourselves or our clients who would ultimately use the tools that we develop with AI or use Gen AI within their own workplace. Ultimately, it boils down to this, the same question I asked earlier. Here's that follow-up slide. It's a question of percentages. How much AI is too much AI? This is the question that's asked by courts. This is the question that is asked by the Thaler lawsuit. This is the question that I have to ask in academia when it comes to determining plagiarism with student writing. And this is precisely the correct question to ask regarding ethics and L&D application. How much is too much? Are employees using it in a manner that is responsible? Who's determining what is a responsible manner according to what ethical code? That's always a really important question. We have to know that our clients are very often interested in what it can do, less so in what impact it has ethically speaking. And again, I'll just reiterate this. Once you've gotten over the data security hurdle, it's important to know how this technology impacts individuals on that ethical front. I can't give you an answer to how much AI is too much because, frankly, it's a case-by-case basis. And of course, the legality is a different question than the ethics or morality, like I pointed out before. I just want to make sure everyone, while they are developing L&D materials, keeps these sorts of concepts top of mind so that they can refer to them when making their editorial decisions. Something else you're going to want to keep top of mind is how to maintain empathy and avoid implicit trust within the software, how to keep the human in the loop, how to be a cynical technology user. Here is our soundbite number 2. Don't surrender your agency to any technology, not even powerful technology like AI. The temptation here is to do exactly that. We want the tech to do it for us, right? Make my pivot table for me, grade my essays for me, develop my new product for me, right? Because it's powerful. There was a comment earlier when we were asked for a single word input that said, it feels magical. And it's true. Arthur C. Clarke's maxim posited that, right? There's no insufficiently advanced technology that doesn't feel like magic. I'm paraphrasing that. Don't quote me on that, but I'm close. Not even powerful technology like AI. That's where the temptation comes, because the more powerful technology is, the more likely we are to try to use it in a world outside of its correct application. And this is called an AI intrusion. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. The bullet point takeaway here, the soundbite: don't surrender your agency to any technology. You or the individuals you are training must always maintain their ultimate oversight. They are the arbiters over what the AI does. At the end of the day, to use a corporate truism here, you are responsible for what your AI develops, right? The excuse, the AI did it, quote unquote, air quotes around that, that's not acceptable. That's where the ethical, responsible AI comes into play. Why am I talking so much about this? Well, I want to, for a moment, speculate a little bit and peer into the future. I've mentioned before that my degree is in literature. And as you might expect, because I study artificial intelligence, I spent a good amount of time of my formative youth reading science fiction literature and speculative fiction, and absolutely love that kind of stuff. So I like to speculate on where this technology will ultimately take us and what the future of work and, of course, the future of L&D will look like when we get there. So right now, we're over here. Phase 1, augmented teams. It's when we are treating artificial intelligence like, quote, really good software. The automation index, by the way, this is just a number that I fabricated. A 0 essentially is an un-AI business. And this essentially represents how much of their business has been automated with the assistance of Gen AI. So that's what that number means. This is either where we are, where your clients will be, or you likely have a boatload of clients over here in phase 0 who are trying to catch up to phase 1, the augmented teams, the really good software. What does that pattern look like? Well, it's simple. Human using an AI tool, really good software. There was a comment earlier that mentioned tool, to get whatever end result you're looking for. Awesome. That's where we are now. And as L&D developers, this is easy to understand. How does the individual, for example, use the tool effectively? That's what this workshop's about. But of course, that's not going to be the only way that this software gets deployed. Because in phase two, and again, speculating here, but I would suspect within between 5 to 10 years, we're going to have something called AI alignment, which instead of just really good software, is a computer in the group. This is when, rather than a human deploying artificial intelligence, a human and an artificial intelligence are going to work alongside one another, side by side. Now, this means that things like decision-making processes and logistics and resource deployment are going to end up in the AI alignment group. So what does that mean for us as L&D professionals? Well, the important thing here is we're going to be teaching different things. AI, pardon me, AI, by the time we reach this point, may, for example, guess what your prompts are going to be. Over here, we have to teach prompt engineering. By the time we get over here, that might be a relic of the past. And instead, we're going to have to teach something like prompt selection or decision-making processes. We have to keep apprised of what the artificial intelligence does, not because of how we use it, but because of how we deploy it. That's where the real key comes for L&D. This, of course, is a roughly double automation index of about 40%. And one pattern I want everyone to note here is notice how the AI moves higher and higher up the chain as we go. Because by the time we reach phase three, and this is an indeterminate amount of time, I've heard guesses around 20 years, but I tend to think it'll be faster than that given the life cycle of artificial intelligence. This is where we end up with a human in the loop. Your automation index is 80%. Now, why do I see a human in the loop? Well, because AI, this is where we achieve, I want to say full automation, but not, because you still need a human in the loop. Don't surrender your agency to any technology, right? Don't get rid of this H bullet point here, because if you do, then, well, you don't know what's going to happen next, which is why even at a high automation index, responsible AI posits that we do not surrender our agency, and we therefore have oversight over whatever it is we have directed our AI to produce, whether that be Gen AI or, by the time we reach this point, holographics, robotics, or similar technology. So what do we teach people about in the L&D space by the time we reach phase three? Well, a couple things. Number one, we can teach people how to repair, modify, upgrade, and maintain artificial intelligence. That's on the technical side of things, the machine learning side of things. But if we're talking about the decision making, then this human here becomes all the more human. A solid humanities education, philosophy, decision making, of course, I'll say literature because I am a literature major, but that background in those studies that allow us to maintain the component of our humanity while using it to audit and secure artificial technology, that's what's going to be critical here. Again, this is speculation, but I personally believe that what we're going to see is a very distinct diaspora of technology and humanities, as if we don't have one already. Right now, the focus is on AI as an automated form of communication, which is precisely what it is. But ultimately, when we're talking about the learning and development space, there's going to be a distinct break between those who build and those who have oversight. Is this going to be a C-suite level executive? Perhaps, but it might also be someone like a project manager. And learning and development materials, there we go, that speak to that individual are going to be critical. Should also mention, probably goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway, not all companies are going to be at these phases at the same time. So you may have a client who's firmly here in phase two, while you have another client who's over here and just learning how to deploy Gen AI within their business. Now, I mentioned earlier, yes.
Can I interrupt you from this is God speaking. I feel like I'm coming in from above. We had a question in here that's just super relevant, so I wanted to interrupt you for a second, ask it for you.
Of course, yeah.
From Michael. So do you see this being a thing where will AI ever become intuitive or able to relate to nuances, do you think?
That is a great question. I am going to be a fence sitter here and say it depends what you mean by that. So if we're talking about in the strict sense of Searle's hard AI, the Chinese room experiment, is AI going to be self-aware, right? Is it going to be hard AI? Can it develop an emotional sensitivity? Can it intuit, posit new creative solutions, problem solve, et cetera, et cetera? My personal belief is no. However, if we have an appropriate enough and powerful enough algorithm, it may not matter. We might be able to get it to a point where even though it is not what we would call intuition, for example, the result is identical, right? So Searle's experiment makes this as clear as possible, and I can't really improve on what he did. He's a luminary, but I tend to believe, frankly, I tend to follow Einstein on this one, who basically posited that there's no difference between the force of gravity and an equivalent force of centripetal motion. And I think if we have an AI that is intelligent enough, that is, has a big enough algorithm, flowchart, and training data, it's going to feel identical and function identically to something that has intuition, whether or not it has what we would quote unquote call intuition from a human element. Does that make sense? Imitation, the sincerest form of flattery there. Sorry, I can't see the chat. I don't know if there's a response.
I mean, for me personally, I think that makes a lot of sense. Michael, feel free to write back in on if you think as well. But yeah, he put that in there and I was like, oh, that's so relevant and helpful.
Yeah,
So
that's a
thank you for
fantastic
that.
question. Yeah, I mean, it all boils down to, I mean, yeah, it all is a question of that humanity study, right? Is there something different or unique about a human's thought process versus that, like a brain is what I mean here, versus that of a computer? And I believe it was, I might get this name wrong. Penrose, it might have been Penrose, who originally posited that the human mind is not at all dissimilar from a computer, right? That was back in the 20s. Essentially, that argument has, reached what we would call its natural terminus here with artificial intelligence, where our neural nets are mimicking human minds, right? Then, of course, and I actually have a slide on this. It's ironic we talk about this. There's a slide on it a little later, which essentially posits that we will never break that barrier because in order for us to do so, we would need a mind smarter than our own to develop a mind that's smarter than we are. I like to call that the Douglas Adams corollary because he brought that up in Hitchhiker's Guide. So, but yeah, thank you. Excellent question. So, where am I on time here? Okay. Let's talk example of AI intrusion, and this would be when you have AI rising to a level to which it doesn't belong as of yet, or ends up in a space which is irrelevant, ineffective, or unethical in application. And the best example of an AI intrusion I can give you here is in my field, which is reading, summarizing, and grading student essays. Of course, FERPA violations aside, let's assume, for example, that I would have access to a data secure LLM. I don't, but let's assume that for our kind of magical idea here. So, assuming I have that access and I can feed student essays in and I can grade them, well, boy, that would do wonders for my time in the Composition 1 classes because I teach 3 sections of Comp 1. Each one has 20 to 30 students. Each one of those students writes an 8 to 10 page essay 4 times a semester. So you're talking, 2 to 3,000 pages that I'm reading every semester. And that's not even counting rewrites and alterations, the feedback that I have to leave for students, rubric applications, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I could absolutely make my job a whole lot easier by developing an AI agent to do that for me. In fact, I even know how to do it. But is that ethical? And the answer is no. It's not ethical because it removes me as the instructor of record. It takes the agency, here we are surrendering that agency. That's what AI intrusion is. It takes the agency of delivering the grade away from myself as the content expert and instead delivers it to this artificial system. Now, I, of course, have directed that artificial system in what to do. I can even give it my rubric and say, follow this rubric. But do I know for a fact that it is still doing the job I have set it out to do? Well, no, that's the black box interpretability problem. We don't have any way of confirming that. Furthermore, it creates a backward incentive structure because if my students, or in your case, in the professional world, if your employees or your clients know that you are using AI to quote unquote grade them or evaluate them in some way, well, then they're more tempted to use AI in the creation of their text. Now, they should be using AI, it's way more efficient, but they do want to deploy it ethically. Reading, summarizing, grading applicant cover letters or resumes. Think about that application, for example. Let's say you're a hiring manager and you are deploying an AI algorithm to read all of the relevant resumes and pick a candidate for you. Is that an ethical application of AI? I would argue not. However, it can be made ethical with a slight alteration. And the simple change there is rather than allowing the AI to make the determination, you simply have the AI instructed to deliver the summary and the important points to the hiring manager who ultimately executes the agency over the AI. Then we're following this model correctly. AI becomes the feedback device with human oversight. We don't go strict automation. Is that less efficient? Of course it is. It's not 100% automation. But is it ethical? Absolutely. Finally, we also want to make sure that inherent bias within the pattern, either in the training data itself or within the algorithmic design, we don't want that to make the interpretation because, of course, these systems are going to mimic whatever pattern is within their training data or whatever they have been trained to do. And therefore, unless we know the intricacies of all of that information, and frankly, that's impossible, no human being alive can read as many books as are in the training data of an LLM, that's a question we'll never have an answer for. Which ultimately leads me to that was a lot of negative ethical stuff, a lot of don't do this, don't do that. But this takes me to my final slide here, or section, which is about personalized learning, reaching the perfect audience. Why do I call it the perfect audience? Because the perfect audience is precisely whom you have developed the material for, right? It is exactly the individual, and I don't mean person or group of people, I mean single individual person for which you have developed the material. How do we get there? Well, that's when education meets Trustpilot. And Trustpilot, for those unaware, is an Adobe software. That's the thing responsible for when you, let's say, for example, you want to know where a country is, geographically speaking. So you look at it, and the next thing you know, you see a whole bunch of ads for, here's how to fly, here's a weekend vacation to Trinidad and Tobago or whatever, right? That's Trustpilot. That is an AI that is feeding you those ads. It is a customized user experience, similar to social media. TikTok is one that excels at this. And ultimately, it becomes an addictive platform because it knows you, it knows your preferences. It's a huge data store, like a data pool, that will direct you in precisely the manner, essentially, that you have mentioned according to your profile. Now, let's combine that with customized delivery, right? The preferential link between things like visual learning and textual learning and image learning, auditory learning, or some combination of those in whatever form or fashion the individual wants. And when you put that together, you have customized L&D. You have education methods for the perfect audience, the individual. You have created something according to the individual's profile that will speak to them exactly how they want, in the manner they want, with the content you defined in an addictive method. This is theoretically an immeasurable boost to L&D efficiency, while also, of course, reducing cost to develop. Is this sort of thing kind of a pie in the sky, will we ever get there idea? Yes, of course, we're not there yet. But the theory exists. It's not difficult to imagine something like this coming about if we were able to deploy the materials in the correct manner. And this is precisely the kind of application that we as L&D professionals need to be ready for, because I imagine it won't be a future far from now when this kind of application is more the norm than the exception. Now, the last slide I have here, I'm going to jump off of here in just a moment and show you these demonstrations live. But what I wanted to have everybody walk away here from, in addition to my final soundbite, which I'll give you in just a moment, is that there are a number of direct, distinct applications for artificial intelligence in the L&D space. It's more than just a simple rewrite this text for me or write some marketing copy for me. So what I want to do is show you a couple examples of agents that I've developed just to kind of get everybody's creative juices flowing and thinking about what the potential possibilities are. And please note that I have made all these in an ethical, responsible way. That's kind of the thing. In addition to data security, those two bullet points always reside at the fore of whatever I'm talking about. So the ones I'm going to talk about today are the Socratic Tutor, the Test Assessment and Assessment, the Real-Time Feedback, and the Role Play. So let's quickly take a look at what those look like. All right, here we are on my ChatGPT interface, and here are the agents. This first one is a Socratic Tutor. So, my L&D professionals, imagine that you could create an enthusiastic, friendly, and helpful Socratic tutor with any topic whatsoever. This one deals with history, specifically 1000 BCE to the dawn of the 21st century, but you can use any topic or content here that you like. Then you deliver this to an individual who then proceeds to have a conversation with it. And then after every single prompt, it asks you a question because that's what a Socratic tutor does. It endeavors to continue the conversation at every single point. So essentially, what you have is an interactive, directable, changeable, and steerable communication and learning device. Of course, you can modify this. This is a proof of concept, which is why I just loaded it with history knowledge. But you can include any relevant material you want, including something like the course handbook for a particular company. Here's the practice test creator. Do you want to develop some assessment materials in the R&D space? Well, I'm sorry, the L&D space. Well, how about you use AI to do it? Because you're a test question author and assessment delivering agent. I'll give you a series of topics, a skill level, and an area of focus. Once you have it, synthesize it into a question, and then let me take the test and grade it. So I created something just to dummy this out. 8th grade social studies, Civil War, and use every question type. And that's exactly what I get. Practice test, which I answer. It grades me accordingly, and I even had it give me the rubric. These are the possibilities, and note that I did this in about 2 prompts, right? These are the possibilities that are within our grasp. It is so much more and so much more capable than the quote unquote like social media sideshow that you might imagine. Now, just to bring this out of the world of academia and into the world of L&D, we of course have this one, which is a resume auditor. I uploaded my resume, and this is a hiring manager. This one is to give me feedback on how good my resume is, and then it's going to write 5 interview questions, and then it's going to interview me. And then if I get the job, it's going to write me an offer letter. And that's precisely what I get. It's pretty cruel, by the way. It's like, do better. Uh, but then, of course, I have my questions, and then I answered them as best as I could, and it told me what I did correct and what I did wrong. Imagine a deployment like this for anyone who's a job seeker or anyone who has to deliver difficult constructive feedback to an individual. Let's say someone is about to end up on a performance improvement plan, or perhaps you have an HR professional who needs to learn how to fire people. Well, you can practice these interpersonal skills through a system like this, get instant feedback, instant discussion, and as you can see, I did this in what is it, about 20 minutes. A very, very effective role-playing agent that will assist you in whatever it is you have directed it to do. So, with those demonstrations out of the way, this is the final slide, which is also the third and final soundbite for everyone to walk away with. Don't define artificial intelligence, Gen AI, by what it does. I'm sorry, define it by what it does, not what it is. It is a trainable, guidable, customizable, and most importantly, automated communication device. Think for a moment of any aspect of your job that may or may not be touched by this in some way. And then you'll know what the hype is all about. And then, of course, I had to, because I love comic books, I have to invoke Spider-Man here, because with great power, of course, comes great responsibility, which is why we want to spend so much time in the ethical and security frameworks.
Incredible. Mark, thank you. Here, I'll go back to us. Oh, you beat me to it. Well done. First off, thank you. This has been incredible. I feel like I've also learned so much in this presentation, which is always great. We do have a couple questions if you have a sec. I'm also
Please,
going
yes.
to post in the chat your LinkedIn in case anyone wants to connect and kind of chat more on any of this. My brain is
Please.
like buzzing with ideas.
I
So
love to
some of
talk, as
the
you might have guessed. So,
but that's the best part. So we had a few questions come in that we either answered as we went or others kind of spoke up and helped out, which was great. But there were a couple that stood out that I did want to address. One that was really interesting had to do with like the neurodiversity population and said, is there a dynamic where people who are neurodivergent are getting flagged as AI more regularly than neurotypical people. I don't know if you've had
That's
any
fascinating.
experience in this, but yeah, I was like, wow, I wonder if that is happening.
So there's two particular use cases, and I'll speak specifically about education here. There's two particular use cases where something similar to this does arise. Now, it's not neurodivergence, but it is ELL speakers. Very, very often, individuals who are ELL will write something, and I don't know if it's a lack of confidence or it depends on the individual, but they don't trust their words. So they run it through an AI to spruce it up or fix it or polish it in some way. And that, of course, is flagged. Now, I don't trust any flagging software. I make that determination for myself. I don't even trust the little squiggly line telling me I made a mistake in Microsoft Word, right? But there are people who make those kinds of determinations. Personally, an academic integrity charging letter to attach to a software that's no better than a coin flip, that's supremely unethical, right? That's not something that I would do. However, the neurodivergent crowd, this is a really interesting point into something that I'm beginning to explore. In academia, we have things called accommodations. So you have individuals who, of course, do the same material, but they have accommodations like, for example, a limited distraction testing environment or time and a half or that sort of thing. I can fully see, and in fact, I would fully endorse the use of Gen AI within accommodations. So if you have an individual who's struggling with, issue X, we could very readily, I can imagine this, create and deploy an AI agent or tool set of some kind, even one that the university say would have ownership over and would deploy, on their command that would assist with that kind of application. As far as have there been false positives, so to speak, for neurodivergence plus AI, there would have to be just because AI detectors don't work. they they say everyone is either AI or not. They're please don't use those.
That's really fair. I do like that idea though, and I hope someone is looking into it because as someone who did struggle with test taking and was often given more time or needed someone there to rephrase a question, I can imagine having a tool like that being really helpful, even if there was kind of guardrails on it, right? Like, so you're not looking up things you shouldn't look up through it, but I think that could be
Precisely.
really beneficial. I hope they bring
Classroom
it
of
to
the
like,
future.
yeah, the larger L&D population as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the classroom of the classroom of the future. I'm about to make myself extinct, but the classroom of the future isn't in the classroom anymore, right?
Yeah,
But
sure. You're not wrong. One other one that was in here that was interesting, and I'm very curious of your opinion, is the use of AI acceptable in writing a research paper or PhD
mm,
thesis? If yes, how? And if no, why?
okay, so this is a great question, and the answer is kind of when I was hedging on the end of that legal governance question, which is how much AI is too much, right? So let me throw a couple use cases at you, and you can say, yeah, I'd be okay with this, or no, I wouldn't. Let's say, for example, you have a student who was supposed to do the reading and didn't do the reading because student. That student went to an AI. They used the AI to read and summarize the entire text for them and then they wrote the paper on their own. Is that an acceptable use case of AI? Is that using AI to write the paper? Not technically, it's not AI generated, but they absolutely couldn't develop that text without the use of the AI software. Or here's another example. Let's say you have a student who does the research, develops the thesis statements, the various possibilities on their own, and takes all of those research notes and thesis statements and everything they need, and they put it into an AI that writes a rough draft for them. And then they go back and they do the editing, revision, and the final polish. Is that acceptable, right? The thing we have to remember about the writing process is that it's not written or not written. It's we call it the process because it's the process. And Gen AI can be instituted at any level or all of them, from research to drafting, composition, editing, revision, proofreading, polish, publication. Every single one of those could potentially be subject to AI. And I would imagine everyone has a different kind of line where they say, okay, this is too much AI, this is unethical. For example, we have typically, although some professors that I know say no, um, they're okay with tools like Grammarly, right? Or like the auto assist within Microsoft Word or Google Sheets or Docs, for example. They're okay with that. But if you fire up ChatGPT, whoa, time out, right? When in reality, is it really all that different?
Well, and
I
those
don't.
lines are blurring right now as platforms, because like I use Grammarly, right? Like in my everyday life, and they now have AI features. So now how do you
Correct.
draw that line? What's allowed and what isn't? I think there's a lot of blur going on, which is why I think conversations like this are really important right now so that we can start to either decide how we personally or our company is going to face these new innovations as they come, because this is just one of many.
Yes, no, yeah. This is not the end of history. Yeah, we will see more as they continue. And also, you're 100% right. It's as clear as mud, as they say. And the reason that that's the case is just because, as you saw, these lines are incredibly thick and difficult to parse out. You could carve out for fair use over here. Meanwhile, you're not allowing for these 10 use cases over here, which is why I personally think that the already slow rate of litigation is going to be exasperated even more slowly. And then when compared to the breakneck speed of artificial intelligence development, I'm sure, as you're all aware, new things come out seemingly every week. Those two are just worlds apart. Will it ever catch up? I don't know. Actually, no. Let me rephrase that. It will catch up when the litigators begin using AI to litigate, but
Ooh.
then we really have to ask if we're in ethically dicey territory there. So,
Yeah, it's like
scary
a
thought,
loop
exciting
of
thought, though.
unsure. Incredible. Well, Mark, I want to give you the opportunity. Any last words of wisdom you'd like to share before we sign off?
Again, I want to thank everybody for coming. Give yourselves a pat on the back because this stuff, as you can see, it is difficult, complex, but also highly necessary. These are the conversations which right now feel remote. They feel like a thing of the future. This feels like a Star Trek conversation, right? Where you're like talking to the computer and you're like, "Oh, is that ethical?" We're there now, right? We are living in that future, and we continue to step forward into the future every single time because I'll leave you with a quote that isn't mine. But it's essentially today's AI is the worst you will ever use. So just imagine what it's going to look like
Oof.
in 2 months, in 5 years, in 10 years, and then ask yourself how much more necessary is ethical, moral, and legal oversight going to be when we get there. So, yeah,
That's a good
thank you guys.
one.
Thank you,
Ooh,
everyone.
that like gave me chills. Amazing. Mark, thank you so much for joining us today. And to everyone that came, thank you to you as well. And the recording will be available. So if you're like, hey, what did Mark say about that again? Don't worry, you'll be able to rewatch it. It'll end up in your email briefly. And with that, I wish you all a lovely day. Thank you again, Mark.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you very much for hosting me today.
Bye.